Welcome to Pause. Good evening, everyone, and welcome to pauseforthetruth.com. I am I'm going to say friendly co host. Some say I am, Jocelyn Turner, and I am super excited that you joined us tonight. And of course, my co host, I won't say partner in crime, I'm just going to say our wonderful co host, Dr. Rogers Kane, is here as well. How are you doing this evening, Dr. Kane?
I'm doing very well, Miss Turner. How about yourself?
It's a beautiful day in the neighborhood. That's what someone said to me today. It's a beautiful day in the neighborhood.
Okay, Fred.
Dr. Kane, we've had some very interesting topics the past few months since starting about, 6 months ago. So
Right.
I am super excited as we celebrate and recognize Black History Month that we're having a very I think it's going to be a very lively discussion tonight. And we have someone that I met several years ago, and due to the pandemic, I actually haven't seen him in person, but I am excited to have him join us tonight. And he's been doing some remarkable things here in Jacksonville, I'll say in the nation, because he wrote a book. We're going to talk about that tonight. And he is doing great things in his career. So, for those of you who don't know him, I'd like to introduce you to Dr. Rudy F. Jameson Jr. How are you doing this evening? And if it's okay if I call you Rudy.
Very well, and that's absolutely okay. Rudy is it.
Well, thank you so much for joining us as we talk about what's wrong with the truth about America's history. And when I shared that topic with a few folks, they said, what's that about? So, Dr. Kane, when we, go back and forth and talk about what show we're going to feature, between you and I and our technology guru, the behind the scenes guy, Tyrone, we kick around different topics. Well, tonight's topic was important to you. Why did you feel that it was important to choose this topic at this particular time?
Okay, so I'm not going to try to make it long and drawn out, but it may be a little bit long. Um, originally we contemplated doing a topic on medicine, black medicine. Physicians,
Evolution.
the evolution of medicine, and particularly as it related to African Americans. But when I started looking at it, there's a couple of things that really got to my attention in terms of the role that physicians played early on in the development of our medical system. Believe it or not, there was a black woman. Her name was Rebecca Lee Crumpler, and she was the first black female physician. She was part of the so-called Freedmen's Bureau, if you remember that. Remember hearing something about it. She was part of that Freedmen's Bureau, and in 1883, she helped to try to establish the hospital systems to help take care of some of the diseases that were taking care of the freedmen, which were basically freed slaves. Uh, at somewhere around 1895, she died, but the creation of the what we call the Black Physicians organizations, the NMA, National Medical Association, also was founded in that same year. Now, there's been a whole lot of things as far as health adversities in health and documentation of those adversities in health as it relates to research and the disadvantages and disparities that we see present day, but it all has a historical background. And then when I expanded upon that, I started looking at things that that looking back in our history, because a lot of those adversities in medicine were not documented. And ultimately, what I wound up doing was getting into the the I guess discussion that you see and hear about the critical race theory, and the concept of the critical race theory. and which is just basically an academic concept. It's about 40 years of age, but the core of it is just that race is a social construct, and that racism is not merely the product of individual bias or prejudice, but also something that's been embedded in our legal system and policies. And that's all where the two connected, especially because the policies of what, as far as health and the treatment of people of color in our healthcare system has been rooted in a whole lot of the legal conundrums and adversities that we've been facing throughout our history. So for so when it came down to the critical race theory, obviously, because it was all about, um, it is not. There has been a whole lot of controversy lately, mainly from people who have misinterpreted the term to mean that we're really trying to place black against white and put down the white race, trying to make teenagers or white folks feel bad, when that was not the case. We had to get into it. I mean, I had to get into it simply because it is part of the core as to what has been going on and what's wrong with our healthcare system. And as you know, me being a physician, the creation of this show was about healthcare and whatever topics around it, i.e., the politics of medicine. And medicine is not without politics, even though we would love for it not to be. I would love not to have politics in medicine, but it is a core value. I don't even want to say value. I shouldn't say that. It's a core component as to how medicine is being directed. So because of that, and I didn't want to make it simply about critical race theory, or even, and this as well expanded, about the 1619 Project, but the discussion could not go on without involving those topics. So at the end of the day, what we have is a discussion about race in America and how it relates to healthcare in America. And they're so intertwined in terms of the political atmosphere we have currently in America, and that has been for quite some time. And so when we came up with this topic, I didn't want to turn people away with critical race theory, but I did want to have a true discussion about the history in America, especially as it relates to health, but and which would be almost anything we talk about will probably relate to health in terms of brown and black people, especially.
Well, I think that concludes the show. No, I'm teasing. Um, I think that lays a good, solid foundation. I would like to start out, though, by first letting our guests know, if you saw our promotion on this show, I forgot to acknowledge that we were hoping that Rudy's partner in the book business, was going to join us tonight, but unfortunately he couldn't, and that's Rodney Hurst. And if you remember him, I remember, and I was going to admit to him tonight, and I'm sorry he couldn't join us, but we're going to get him on in a future show. Is when I heard about it wasn't about a Coke and a hot dog. Is that it?
It was never about a hot dog and a Coke.
I was just mortified, because I can tell you, I did not know about Axe Handles Saturday, Sunday, right? And so, and I'm thinking like, man, I grew up in Jacksonville. I didn't know anything about that, but I was going to publicly acknowledge him and thank him for enlightening me. And so it is so important, Dr. Kane, as Dr. Kane mentioned, Rudy, that we do need to have these conversations. But I'm gonna pause for a minute and let you tell our guests a little bit about the book that you co-authored with Rodney Hurst. Never forget who you are. So why was it important for you all to write that book on that topic?
Yeah. So It's funny. Rodney and I had been doing work around the community together for a while, and um, so it's circa 2009. Rodney and I end up in Washington D.C. at Barack Obama's initial presidential inauguration, and we just so happened to be staying in the home of a dear friend of mine who's the nephew of Uncle Rodney, named Cassius Priestley. So the entire time we're there, we're literally riding the train down to the mall, and every step we took was like a history lesson. Shoot, I remember us, Cassius, me, and all of our friends were out at some, I don't know, Democratic caucus party, and I caught a cab back to the house just to sit up under Rodney and hear what he had to say. So when we got back to Jacksonville, I kind of jumped in his hip pocket and wanted. I was just a sponge. I just wanted to learn. And like you, Jocelyn, I had heard about Axe Handle Saturday, but I wasn't really taught about the intricacies of the 1960 sit-ins and segregation and what it actually meant and what were those implications on today. So fast forward, when I defended my dissertation for my doctorate, I invited Rodney to come to my dissertation defense. Now, my dissertation is around Black male perspectives of the role race plays in the world of work, right? So Rodney sees this dissertation, and he had never been to a dissertation defense, blew him away. He was like, who in the hell talk about the role race plays in the world of work in academia, right? So we became even closer. And a couple of years later, he invited me to co-author a book with him. So we decided, Rodney had already had the initial title, Never Forget Who You Are. As a matter of fact, that was supposed to be his second book. But his second book became Unless We Tell It, It Never Gets Told, which is like a history book for local Jacksonville legends, right? People who have some affiliation with Jacksonville, and we should know their history. So every chapter, he profiles somebody: James Weldon Johnson, Bob Hayes, Johnetta Besh Cole, Welton Coffey, Ronnie Belton, A. Philip Randolph. I mean, Augusta Savage.
I'm sorry, I digress.
So I mean, but every chapter he talks about, he gives you a history lesson, right? So, so Never Forget Who You Are, he had already had like stuck in his mind. But what Rodney and I had been experiencing is, I had been looking at, the role race plays in the world today through a 50-year-old eyes, and Rodney at the time was 75. So we decided that the title of the book would be Never Forget Who You Are, Conversations About Racism and Identity Development, right? And if you see the book, and I'll advise everybody, if there's a chat, to put the website of the book in the chat so they can actually see the book. The logo on the book was designed, it's a continent of Africa overlaid with the American flag, and then there's a fingerprint within the American flag, and it encompasses. W.E.B. Du Bois has this ideology of double consciousness, and it's the incessant struggle between your African and your American, right? And that's what that represents. Every day we wake up as Black folk, I mean, it's an existential fight for resistance, right? I mean, I'm talking about everything from walking into a boardroom, having to understand all of the social codes, the cultural caveats, the political nuances, and then going home back to your neighborhood, having to make that adjustment as well, right? So that's an incessant struggle that we have. So we thought it was important that we modeled how we can have these conversations about racism and identity development from a 50-year-old set of eyes and from a 75-year-old set of eyes.
Wow, that's powerful.
Mr.
I'll take it. I'll take it.
You're that coincides with the issues and consistencies of your more national books that we just discussed in terms of the CRT, critical race theory, as well as the 1619 Project, because all of them are trying to give historical presentations and about African American life here in the U.S. Not, and I know most people look at it and they think about slavery. You keep hearing the word slavery, slavery, slavery. When you start looking at both of those books, 1619 projects and the project and the critical race theory, but it goes beyond that. It goes to the point to involve what you are discussing and what Mr. Frazier experienced with the Axe Handle Sunday, because it was a continuation of our efforts to be viewed as equals in society. Even though our Constitution was built on all men are created equal, it was built on a lie at that time, especially. And when I say built on a lie, they didn't truly believe it. All men are created equal. That part I have to make sure
you weren't. Dr. Kane, you weren't a man. You were private, son.
based on that, and truth be told, there's a whole lot of issues, a whole lot of concern as to the belief of some people in our society that that's still true.
Right.
It's still true. And what we want to do, and we want to talk about it. We're not going to be able to dispel or convince that individual whom is adamant in the belief that we are not equal to them. We're not going to convince them with a 1 hour or hour and a half conversation that they are wrong. What we want people to look at is the history, which is what you guys' books, at least from a local standpoint, is historically viewing that subject matter. Is that not correct?
Absolutely. No, you're exactly right. I mean, so our book was published prior to this idea of critical race theory, like taking center stage. I like to call it a political theater, right? And what happened was Christopher Rufo out of Hillsdale College kind of grabbed the term and marketed it as this political theatrical bag that he was going to throw everything in that made white folk uncomfortable, right? I mean, that's the strategy. And the very first thing he threw in the bag was the 1619 Project.
Yeah.
Right. So when we go, let's rewind. Critical race theory is an academic theory that emerged in the law area, right? So there are students at Harvard and they're taking a class from Derek Bell. Derek Bell is arguing with Harvard about hiring a Black female in the College of Law.
40 years ago.
40, they did not hire a Black female like in his time frame, and he left. He became a dean at another College of Law. Well, the students who was taking his class, his constitutional law class, got upset. And they protest, they sat in, they even took over the dean's office. And they were upset because what Harvard told them was, we can't find a qualified African-American to replace Derek Bell. And they asked the question, why would you want a mediocre Black professor as opposed to an excellent white professor? And I mean, and they're saying to themselves, that's exactly why. Like, who gets to decide what mediocre is? Like Derek Bell. And so Derek Bell was teaching, the way he was teaching law through the lens of race.
Now, Derek Bell, white or Black?
Black.
I just want to make sure our audience got that.
He's Black. So he's teaching it. So what the students do is they create an experimental course, and they invite visiting professors to come teach what Derek Bell had been teaching. And that's how the concept of critical race theory emerged. Derek Bell and Kimberly Crenshaw coined the term critical race theory. But all it was Derek Bell was teaching constitutional law through the lens of race. Now let's go back to what you were talking about earlier about medicine, right? We can take that exact same concept, that exact same instrument, that lens, and we can look at medicine through the lens of race, right? In my area, we can look at academia through the lens of race. We can look at corporate America through the lens of race. We can look at faith through any area, right? So anything, environment, right? So when we think about that, it's hard to not do that. Critical race theory is just a name for it. Like critical race theory ain't been taught in K-12 schools. It ain't even been taught in undergrad, not even master level courses, really, right?
Nope.
So I don't think that impacts like how we teach history. What it does is it creates a fear, right, in those educators, so that they are hesitant to talk about historical truths. And those things are subjective or have become subjective, right? So when we think about the critical examination of history, that has become politicized to the point where educators, they're confused, right, and afraid to share information that they think may make some students or families uncomfortable.
Let me add to that, because I think some of those educators, be quite frank with you, may not know, may not have the level of knowledge about what truly happened, because they're still looking at the Eurogenic view.
Dr. Kane, how can they? I would say most of them don't. Think about it. Like the reason Rodney's book is so important, it was never about a hot dog and a Coke, is because it's the only comprehensive account of that day. It's the only comprehensive account of white men standing in Confederate uniforms on the corner of Monroe and Adams, handing out free axe handles and bats to over 200 plus white men who commits to assault 38 NAACP Youth Council students and anybody else who was black downtown. Like that's, the newspaper wasn't there, the radio station wasn't there, the television station wasn't there. So they wanted to erase that part of history. Then, so how can our educators now, where would they have gotten the information from? Then that's kind of a segue into Rodney's second book, Unless We Tell It. It never gets told, right? And that's the importance of the 1619 Project, right? Is we're beginning to change the narrative, and we're beginning to do it in a real legitimate way. The 1619 Project won a Pulitzer Prize. And you're trying to tell me a K-12 school student, a junior in high school, can't read a Pulitzer Prize winning work? That's worldwide.
It's a shame.
So and I guess that gets me to this idea of truth, right? My personal belief is that we must investigate like the what distinguishes legitimate knowledge from opinion. And we have to be instrumental in that. So when I was doing my dissertation, I remember in every course I took, I was told in one way or another, Rudy, your lived experience is cool, but it doesn't mean anything without empirically examined evidence. And what that is it has to be written in a journal article. All right, so where do I go find that? I don't know. I'm not black. That's not my space. So I had to go outside of the university, right, to find it. But when I started seeing these bodies of literature around race and the impact it plays in our lives every day, Dr. Kane, Jocelyn, it changed my life. Have you ever heard the term nigrescence? The term nigrescence means being black in the face of white supremacy. That's what the term means. And there's a cross-racial identity scale, which is a psychometric identity development instrument that sits on a continuum between assimilation, self-hatred, pro-black, anti-white, re-evaluation, and multiculturalism. Like if you can imagine like taking that psychometric assessment and seeing where you sit, and you sitting at assimilation, self-hatred. Like I've been colonized to the point where I hate myself.
Psychometric meaning measuring your psychology behind a particular subject matter in this case.
Absolutely. Yes. Right. Yes. It's almost like your subconsciousness, right?
Right.
I was writing an academic article with two of my mentors, and they're Mexicans out of South Texas, Elsa, McLaren, around that area. And the narrative was around family. and it was like family as it relates to education. And so we were all on like a Zoom call, and we were editing my piece within the manuscript. And I remember Miguel Guajardo. I mean, he's unapologetically Mexican. Said, Rudy, I know you well. I know you to be a proud Black man. Not once did you self-identify in your narrative. Now we're writing about family, and it's a narrative piece. And I did not say at one time I was a Black man. I felt embarrassed. Embarrassed. But think about it. Subconsciously, why wouldn't I say that in my narrative?
Gotcha.
I would probably offend somebody.
Yeah.
Right? I mean, think about how sensitive, how hypersensitive the socio-political climate right now is to the words white and Black.
Yep.
Racism. There are bodies of literature out there around. Have you ever heard of Joy DeGruy? She wrote the book Post-Traumatic Slave Syndrome. She talks about this idea of epigenetics, and it is the genetic transfer of trauma, right, within the Black race.
Yep.
Like generationally, we can literally transfer psychological, emotional trauma to our children. Like
and
through birth.
For those that, just in case, I just want to elaborate a little bit more on epigenetics. You know, when you look at genetics, you look at DNA, RNA, and RNA reading the DNA, but then you have the RNA that makes certain proteins that help guide the manufacturing of that person's whatever it is that you're trying to accomplish. And so with epigenetics, there has been, and I think what gave it some validity recently has been a study in Israel, I think. I mean, no, not Israel. I'm sorry. Jews that supported something along that line. Even though we're a prima example of 400 years plus of epigenetics.
Right. And then Dr. Kane, it's how that DNA interfaces with its environment.
Yes.
So at the time I'm writing my dissertation, it was a self-exploration of, Rudy, why in the hell can't you advance through these organizational structures and you eating your colleagues' lunch? I'm better than they are, but I couldn't advance. I didn't understand what was going on, right? But when I came across this idea of nigrescence, when I came across this idea of self-monitoring and code switching, right? And uplift suasion. When I came across that body of work, I was like, oh, this is what's happening with me. And I began to walk in white spaces differently, right? I began to be better able to navigate and negotiate in those white spaces without compromising my identity.
Yeah.
I was mad, right? And I couldn't articulate it. You ever heard the idea of King saying riots are the voice of the unheard?
Yeah.
He said that once. Riots, they're trying to say something, but they don't know how to articulate it. So it comes out as like violence and destruction, right?
Yeah.
A lot of energy.
Yeah. I can see that.
So, but the better we're able to process and manage those emotions and be able to articulate them in ways that have other people think differently about these borders of difference. I don't care if it's race, gender, sexuality, faith, disability, you name it. Like, we have to have people to be more cognizant, to stretch their critical consciousness around difference. And we can't other anybody. Everybody is, should be, right, equal in our eyes.
All men are created equal. Men and women are created equal.
Right.
Thank you.
So we say, right? But the actuality is we live in a hierarchical, hegemonic social order primarily based on race. Yep. And whenever I'm having these conversations, I like to begin with some really solid evidence that race exists as a social construct, right?
Yes.
So two resources that I always recommend is Ibram Kendi's Stamped.
Stamped from the beginning. He froze on us, but Yeah, it's the book Stamped from the Beginning. I love it. I've read it. It's an excellent book, along with several others. Look like we lost Rudy for a second. There you go.
Yeah, there he is.
I know we lost you for a minute, Rudy, but
okay.
we went ahead and just talked about Stamped from the Beginning, but go ahead.
And I want to, just a second. So I wanted to chime in a bit just to remind anybody who is just logging in that we are talking about what's wrong with the truth about America's history. And if you're just joining us, you're going to have to play this again, because I tell you what, I have gotten a history lesson. You notice I was like this in front of a good movie. I'm like, OMG, this has been very enlightening. Go ahead, Rudy.
So Stamped is the definitive history of racial ideas, and he goes back to the 1500s and literally shows us like how the idea of race was constructed, right? And then there's a caste, the origins of our discontents by Isabel Wilkerson. Yes. She does the same thing, but she compares caste systems, and she compares 3 caste systems. She compares the caste system in India, Hitler's caste system, and the American caste system. And then she takes a deep dive into how America's caste system has evolved over time, and where there is residual systemic racist institutions, right? Yes. That still abide by the same premise of race and racism. And until we start peeling back those layers and acknowledging like where they exist. So I'll give you a perfect example where one exists. It's 2017. I'm on campus at the University of North Florida, and I'm getting ready to deliver a presentation on culturally responsive teaching strategies to a group of interns. These interns are in their last semester of a teacher education program. So the next step for them is in a classroom, right? I walk into the room, there are 82 teacher interns. There's not one black male. There are 2 black females. There are 82 teacher interns, right? So I deliver the presentation. I'm angry. I'm talking about I'm heated. I march up to the dean's office and I say, hey, look, this is unacceptable. She said, Rudy, you're absolutely right. That's 2017. Right now, so we started what we call the Urban Education Scholars Program. So I go out and I recruit, retain, graduate, and employ students from historically underrepresented backgrounds to major in teacher education. I have 40 on campus right now on scholarship, diversifying the teacher education pipeline, right? But if it's not Rudy in that space saying this is unacceptable, that same racial, right, institution exists. Like this, white folk don't have a monopoly on teaching.
You would think.
But they weren't. There wasn't any intentionality to build relationships across the St. Johns River so that we could diversify the teacher education pipeline. So I go post up at the high schools and have conversations with these young men and young ladies about majoring in teacher education, and it's like finding a needle in a haystack. But when I do, they got my full support. I'm gonna walk them through. I'm gonna try to get them out of there debt free and guarantee them a job, and their career trajectory is gonna be extremely high.
And you know, the accusation was not one of an explicit nature. It was more of an implicit probability that they were, or at least they can claim it anyway. They just didn't know any better.
That's what makes it systemic, right?
Right.
And so we all practice this idea of homosocial reproduction, homophily. We gravitate to, we befriend, we hire, we develop, we promote people who are looking like us. Think about the last funeral or wedding you went to, right? Like, I mean, we are natural, we're human beings. That's what we do. We gravitate to people who look and act like us. If we're not intentional about diversifying our developmental networks, then we won't ever see diversification. So, and I think this is real critical for Black folk.
I remember being in. No, go ahead. I'm sorry. Go ahead.
The idea of twice as good for half as much is real. That's our reality.
Yeah.
Right. And I don't think we can ignore that. Like, we got to develop a level of connoisseurship in our space that is undeniable. And oftentimes we're going to be working for people who, may not be as smart as us. But we got to have the resilience, right, to get by that and be twice as good for half as much. Because our next generation, we got to get them a better head start.
Yeah. I remember in college, just real quick, I remember a similar situation where, I was I'm a pharmacy school graduate, proudly Florida A&M University. And I remember being in my pharmacology class, and the professor, which was a really nice guy, wound up being a nice guy, Dr. Trottier. And we shared our pharmacology experience with Florida State. Okay. Yep. They had their PIM students, pre-med students, come over and take classes in our pharmacology at the School of Pharmacy. Well, it was at that time, it was top of the notch building. But anyway, on one side, it was kind of an auditorium, a theater-like look to it. On the, if you looking at the professor, on the left side, all black. On the right side, all white. Okay. Even though there was much more blacks on the left side than it was white. Whites might have been 12, 15 students at best. And I'm sitting in the back row. And one of the things that when he asked, he says, there any questions? I raised my hand and I said, why are you always talking to the right side of the room? I said, your left side, but my right side. He said, what do you mean? I said, you always talking. You're looking at them when you're explaining things, you're talking about things, you're looking at them. And so, and I'm just, I think I was maybe in my junior year. And, maybe even sophomore year. Bottom line was, he then called me to his office after the meeting. He wanted to meet with me. See, everybody's dismissed, but Dr. Kane, I need to see you down in my office. I'm going like, oh, hell. I done got in trouble now. Right. I go down, and he offered me a job. Okay, doing as a research assistant, which I did do clinical research at that. Well, at least did some research in that. But he offers me a job, and he wound up, and truth be told, he wound up being a really nice guy. He just didn't know any better. And that's what I was trying to say about implicit and explicit.
Oh yeah, and that, so there's an educative opportunity there for us to teach, right? But we got to be knowledgeable enough to be able to convey the information in a way that they're receptive to. But we also got to be willing.
But can I add to this? We just can't focus on the fact of just teaching it, because to your point, Rudy, we know this. Mm-hmm. We know these problems exist. Rogers, we know these problems exist. It's got to be institutionalized, and this is part of the framework where institutions are policed by and governed by these policies. Diversity, if it has no consequences in the framework of financial institutions, educational institutions, it does not work, because they have to understand that, we have to abide from it. If not, it's forgotten. Okay, if there's a penalty, diversity and having women, men, Native Americans, all the disadvantaged, the people on the periphery have to be there, okay, within that institutionalized structure. We're talking about a cultural shift in the paradigm, okay, that has to be noticed, and there has to be penalties, and you have to meet these standards as you all have worked within corporate America to meet the job description with that criteria. If there's no penalties, the racism will always be, looked upon, and it's not going to be explicit. They're smart enough to know, like, okay, I can't do this. It's not going to be as dumb as the damn fools who went to Almond Arbery thing and just chase somebody down the street. It's not going to happen. And if we think that we can just do it yourself, Rudy, you made an excellent point. But the point of you saying we have to teach them, we all come from the framework of giving back. Okay, I think that's why we're all here. We have a social commitment. We have a human commitment to do that. That's what we were bestowed upon us by W.E.B. Du Bois. Okay, and so are Black folks, and especially coming from, we are the talented Tims in many ways still. So, okay, we can teach all we can, but if it's not input in the structure and everything, America has to live and deal with the hypocrisy of their history. Okay,
Yeah. So
once they understand the history and everything else, and that's going to be a hard thing to come because they've been living with basically what has come out now is white privilege because they never believed you before. They never believed you when you were talking, Rudy. Okay, that Rogers, they never understood, and they claim that, I didn't understand this. Oh, you know what? We're going to get you back on our panel and we're going to ask you to help us. Okay, and so we become people that really convey that thought. And Joshua, you can add to this too, please do. But they don't integrate us into that totality thing. We're still that one. So, what that one has to do is have to change the culture.
yes,
Okay.
but we got.
And by the way, 1 second, Donald Bell just joined the discussion. We're trying to get him to take the cover off of his camera so we can see him. But thank you.
I'm very sorry about that.
Thank you, Donald, for joining us this evening.
Okay, not bad. Excuse me. You can call me.
Donald, thank you.
Call me Don. So I see all my books about Black history and everything back here.
Yeah.
Well, yeah, you're definitely black and all right.
So,
well, the whole thing is that you're being black and African American, whatever you want to call it, it's a burden. It's a heavy burden. It's a weight. I mean, we carry that weight just like the shackles of slavery had on us for many years.
That's what epigenetics is about.
We're still carrying those shackles of our ancestors. So, to ease that burden, to have some relief of that pain that we constantly feel, we have to be part of the change that, gets rid of this institutionalized slavery, because that's all it is. It just has a different form. Because now, as soon as you speak up, you're a bad guy.
Yeah.
So Don, I truly appreciate your point, and you talked about kind of being the one, and it goes back to something that Dr. Kane mentioned earlier. We can't take the politic out of politics.
No, you can't.
Like we got to be sophisticated enough to work in that space in a real strategic way, where we are bringing other voices in, so that we are building an infantry, like a fund of knowledge in that space, right? And we got to be real strategic about it. That's a lot of work.
Well, the infantry has to change the infrastructure.
Yes.
Well, one of my listeners, did pretty much say we cannot depend on an occasional, well-intentional, non-black person to include us, and I think they're absolutely correct. We can't depend on the occasional, well-intentioned, non-black person to include us.
As a Dr. King, as informed as I am about this idea of race, I still find myself struggling with my own internalized racism. Like, where does that show up from me in the world of work? Like, where am I not exercising, my privilege to see more equity, right? And a lot of people, they haven't even considered that. They just worrying about them and theirs. I got 2 kids at home I need to feed, right? I ain't got time to talk about no race. When I walk in the room, Don, they do it to me all the time. Oh, here comes this race conversation.
Yeah. Well, you're always going to hear that because there's something they don't want to hear, because the whole the whole theory on this black and white thing is about hypocrisy. They don't want to understand where the fault lies in their America. Their America is a total lie, from the Native Americans to any people of color being brought over here. Okay, they've been impoverished, been on the periphery, okay, discriminated socially, within healthcare, and the judicial system, the prison system. Is all mockery, and to bring America to the understanding is a heavy task. But it's, to your point, it's got to be, it's too much of a burden for one. So it's got to be a collective that does things.
I think the power elite recognizes, be quite frank with you, the power elite recognizes the inequities that we're discussing, but they don't care, because if they do things any other way, what will happen is the financial backbone of this country may be, at least initially, threatened because this country was built on the backs of black folks, and we're continuing with a whole lot of our financial gains on the backs of brown, of black and brown. And not saying that we can't survive if we do get rid of that, those inequities. All I'm saying is some people feel that they still need to do that. And this has been a government-backed plan, even to today, with the considering redlining and all the other things that are taking place in our financial institution.
Yeah,
I stand corrected if you guys can.
No. You're absolutely right. I think that there's a cost to this social change that we're talking about. And in my mind,
I just want him to explain something to me.
Okay.
I'm sorry, I don't mean to be rude. Who are you considering the power elite?
Well, I mean, I'm looking
No, I'm not. No, because I mean, are you discussing the power elite as in terms of our black leadership, or the political elite?
No. I'm talking about
okay.
I'm not talking about us. We're not power elite. Hell, we power elite. We can have a conversation.
Because that's why I had asked, because sometimes I see us also as our leadership is really disenfranchised.
Right. I'm not talking about us.
And we don't speak in one voice, and not that we have to, because we always have to have opposing voice in him, and that's what's great to have the dialogue. So I just want to be clear on that, sir.
Okay. And one of our listeners is absolutely looked like he's going the direction that you're on. He's saying that we have to have the business. We have to be about the business of bringing about a change in the mindset of the masses of black folks, and be less concerned with sports and entertainment, and realize that the system is planning daily for our demise.
Well, I don't always get with that, because you know what, and the thing about it, I think that's somewhat, without trying to hurt anybody's feelings or say anything damaging, is that we've done really good. That in my era, I felt that way. Okay, you can read the book, Your $1 Million Slaves and everything else, where sometimes we're still like Chattel. Okay. However, we're still dealing with the facts that today that we have a power movement that goes on within black athletes that we haven't seen before. These young kids aren't as fearful of retaliation as we were. LeBron James, many of those, many of the ball players in basketball have stood up when the LA Clippers, owner said racist things. Okay, and there's a collective. Now that collective did start, admittedly, with Bill Russell, okay, and Jabbar, Jim Brown, and those guys. When Muhammad Ali was fighting for his rights, but they don't have the burdens, okay, and the fear of retaliation that black folks of our era had. Okay, and there's also, I mean, you can either listen to hip hop or disdain hip hop or whatever. But there's a power base to that now the whole Black Super Bowl was the blackest thing I've ever seen in my life. Okay, so there's a power base that we have to acknowledge and exist. And sometimes, from a parental role, and somebody who is 50 to 60 to 70 might not understand that dynamic, but it's here. And rather than to eliminate it, we have to adjust our thoughts to it. And how can we empower that?
Rudy?
Yeah, in my mind, I think I think we got a lot of work to do, man. And when I think about social change, I think it's about shared power and shared comfort, right? And I'm of the mindset, of Frederick Douglass. Power concedes nothing without demand. It never has, and it never will. We got to be in spaces to demand, right? Shared power. And that's the work, right? And then this idea of comfort, like we got to be able to articulate our discomfort.
Yeah.
When you think about this critical race theory, this Senate Bill 148, the Stop Woke bill that's saying you can't, not only in education, but in any spaces, give any diversity and inclusion workshops, sexuality workshops, if it makes anybody uncomfortable, or they'll be, they're willing to sue, right? They can sue. And I'm saying the same thing. if I'm uncomfortable, then we're not talking about it.
Yeah. How do I sue?
I'm a sue too, right? I'm a sue too, right?
But wouldn't you agree that there's a different dynamic?
We got to be able to articulate like there is a counter narrative to what you're talking about, and they're being real strategic. And somebody said earlier about they're constantly planning our demise. Man, there's 70 million plus, a faction of 70 million plus United States voting citizens, right? Who are voting for this ideology of a critical race theory. Like, what in the world are you thinking about? Like that, they're just willfully ignorant and blindly obedient. They don't want to be informed. How can you name a Senate bill "Stop Woke"? I just want you to stay in Plato's cave. I don't want you to be enlightened.
This country's foes, enemies, are having a field day at this whole process and discussion about CRT and the related issues around it. They're recognizing, Russia feels, I don't have to go in there and invade U.S. I don't have to do anything. All I got to do is continue, first of all, raise the racial issues that are in play here. But they're not the one to raise it. We are. As long as those people, for lack of better description, I almost said something I shouldn't. For those people who do not want to do the how did they do in the South Africa Truth and Reconciliation?
Yep.
If those people who refuse to go the Truth and Reconciliation route in terms of what's going on in this country, then what you're doing is allowing this country to implode upon itself, because you can't keep going the way that we're going in terms of calling us a democracy, and you have such a content of people that are now becoming the majority, the black and brown, the majority in this country. There's no way this is going to be able to continue going this direction.
I have to ask a question, and sorry, Rudy. I just want to ask a question, though. We talk about just even having this conversation. Are any of us at risk of anything for even bringing this topic up tonight? I mean, when you go to work and you're around folks who, I'll just say white folks, and they're watching tonight or listening to us. Do you think about, when you have these types of conversations, I wonder what folks are now going to say about me, and perhaps not with you, Rudy, for instance, because that's what you do. But I mean, even for the rest of us.
But Jocelyn, it's a huge risk for me. Like, there was a professor 2 weeks ago whose class got canceled because they were getting ready to talk about something about civil rights at Flagler College. That's right down the street. Mm-hmm. John Delaney is the president there now.
Right.
Like, this is huge, and this is infringing upon my academic freedoms, right? But what I'm standing on is I'm standing on the truth. I'm standing on that I can reference anything that I'm telling you, and it's not just I'm saying it. It's not my opinion.
But isn't that the whole? I mean, okay. I mean, I think doing these forums, to your question, Jocelyn, there's always been a fear of retaliation. There will always be a fear of retaliation. You can go back and look at what they did to Paul Robeson. Nobody was more eloquent, you find no more versatile individual in history, Black history, than Robeson, or arguably. Okay. And there's always a price to pay. Okay. But the question that comes out of it for me is that, are you willing to do that and speak up and have frank discussions, or at least initiate those discussions and deal with the backlash for the greater good?
Yeah, and to follow up with it, yeah, and that's why we're having a conversation tonight. But I want to even push back and say, at what age, how early should we start having these conversations with our children?
That is how early? That starts at birth, damn near. Because you know what? We're Black at birth. Okay. When they had immigrants come to the society, They could, they could change their name. They could change their things about them to integrate themselves. America's a melting pot. Okay, we could not do that. They're going to sit there and say, "Hey, Rudy's still a brown skinned brother. That's another brown skinned brother. Oh, he's a little lighter. He might fit in a little bit. He might have some. He got a different little melanin. You do too, and everything else. But we still black. So that conversation starts when we got here because we were already branded something. We've already been branded.
Yeah,
We came over here as less than a person, first of all. So the fear should not be the fear should be white folks of what they've done, because that's what a lot of their fear is. Okay, the fear of like, oh, you know what? Can't let Rudy out there in Master's house because he's gonna rape all women. Now, Rudy ain't thinking about it. Rudy just want to be free, damn it. Let's be real. Rudy ain't thinking about that. So that discussion, that frank and conversation has to begin early in life. And I don't say it begins as a deliberate discussion. Okay, one of my best things, I was talking to Marcus Rediker. I don't know, Rudy, you might be familiar as an educator with Marcus Rediker. Marcus Rediker wrote the book The Slave Ship and the Amistad also. Okay, he's a white guy. Okay, and we got in the discussion. He had heard from me for a while. He said, "Hey, Don, what's happening?" and everything else. And then I was talking about it, and we got in a conversation about Sinkay. Okay, and Sinkay as a little boy was my hero. But I found out about Sinkay and Amistad going to barbershop and reading those golden lineage or whatever they were, what the name of it was, comic books. And in fact, I got one right here. It was like a Gold Legacy. And it had Sinkay on it. And Daddy didn't direct me out because what happens in barbershop. Brothers talk about something we ain't going to talk about here, and that's just how it went. But that was part of my education. And that education led me to the understanding that we were so much more than what they say we are. Okay, then I could be so much more than what we say are. Well, our visualizations and who we see and everything. The Black Panther movie where they showed Wakanda and what Africa could have been without colonialism, showed us who we were, say we were. So little boys and girls don't come at feeling inferior about their hair, their looks, their nose being broad. We cannot be ashamed of who we are. So it starts at birth. And we have to nurture that, whether we do it directly or or less directly. I think that conversation has to be had because, number one, we are preparing people. Okay, and it starts in the home first.
Yeah, both black and white.
Black, yeah. Well, the dialogue with white folks is a little different.
No. I ain't saying it's the right dialogue. I'm saying the right dialogue should start early in their life.
Yes, right.
And the right dialogue is truth and reconciliation, discussing what really happened in this country.
But let me understand. Let me just ask you a question, because quite honestly, I don't give a damn about reconciliation sometimes.
Well, yeah,
I don't really care about them being happy. They done too many damn things. I just want to be fair. I want to have my economic freedom. Like, we were saying earlier, I want to get my home and everything else. I want to have I want to have what you have. Okay, we can talk about reconciliation all we want, but was there reconciliation really in South Africa? Because if reconciliation comes without a price, everybody gets off a little bit. We talking, it's a bunch of dialogue.
No, okay. That's not what I meant, but okay.
No. It might not be what you want, and please expound, But I'm saying, is it really real, the reconciliation part? Because until you have something to lose, you're not fearful of anything.
Well, and that's what they got to lose, because that's what one of our listeners are saying. The fear is also that they come to power, that we'll do to them what they did to us.
Right. I agree with you that. But and that's a damn shame. I'll be honest with you. Excuse my French. Because what? The most loyal Americans in the world. We've had hosts and all that. We've been beaten and everything else. So that's where the truth part has to come in to Josh's point, I'm not as worried about educating our own as I'm worried about the thing needs to be educated is on them.
Right.
That's where the history
educate both. Because we have plenty of our people out there that just don't know, don't understand, not saying that they've been brainwashed, but they haven't really looked at their own historical and people's background to know who they are.
They can't look at it though. History's a lie. History's a damn lie.
No, I'm talking about our history. I'm not.
No. But we don't even know our history.
And that's my point.
We are ignorant to our own history, and they lie about their history.
And that's what I'm saying. We have to educate our children about our history.
We got presidents still calling them Indians. They're Native Americans. That's their damn country. You stole it. I mean, the whole hypocrisy starts with indigenous people coming over here. We're going to call us American. We're going to say Columbus did this thing. And now you see these monuments coming down right now, and they're upset about it. Wait a minute. They got tarnished history. If they were brothers, we would be brothers and sisters. They wouldn't even be talking about this. We are glorifying murderers, rapists, plunderers of the world. You know, they talk about the atrocity. We ain't talked about King Leopold.
I think they talk about the first 10
millions of folks.
The first 10, 20 presidents all had slaves. Is that correct?
Yeah.
All of them.
All of them.
Yep.
As Thomas Jefferson sit there and wrote his whatever it was, he had all his slaves there tending to his needs.
No, not only had
the most slaves in all
had all his slave babies too. And all his black babies.
Yeah. So
Dr. Kane, I wanted to point out to our viewers and listeners that the show typically ends at 7:30, but OMG, who knew? You notice I was like this. I'm like, okay, this is a co-host show, but looks like you guys are just really having a good time. And I'm just sitting back really enjoying it because I just wanted to ask one question from the very beginning. Why are people uncomfortable talking about the history of race in America? But before you answer that question, out of respect to our guests, we want to know, because we're getting a lot of comments in the chat, are you okay for talking for a few more minutes, and then we'll cut it off and definitely bring you both back for a future show? Are you okay with continuing on with the conversation for a few more minutes?
Yeah, we're good.
So then, so why are people uncomfortable talking about the history of race in America?
So I think my personal opinion is that, when people have had the privilege of seeing themselves in the history books as founders, right, as successors, and then they begin to see something different, it's almost like, they've been privileged so long, equality feels like oppression. Like now I'm beginning to see, Black folk who founded things, Black folk who invented things, and that's not what I've been seeing. So that idea of supremacy, right? Subconscious supremacy. I think that's the backdrop to all of this. That creates the discomfort. Like, I'm not equal to you. Right. And that's where I think all of us need to be more comfortable being uncomfortable, because if we're honest with ourselves, we think they ice colder too. Not only do they think they ice colder, we think they ice colder too.
Thank you. I mean, people do.
Yeah, the other part of it, when we look at I'm sorry, Donald, one point. When we look at the demographics and knowing the way that America is going, we know by 2030, the minorities are going to be the majority here in our country. And I wondered if that's the reason why people are uncomfortable or either trying to gain so much financial control or power, is because they're seeing the evolution of America is that Black and brown are going to be the majority by 2030.
They're not trying to gain, they're trying to retain. Okay, they already have that level of control, and I'm not saying we're not already in the majority, the black and brown. What I will say is that they are very fearful, I believe, I could be wrong, very fearful of losing that privilege, that white privilege that they have possessed for so many years, that they didn't have to do what the everybody on this panel have done to make themselves of the stature that they are right now. And that is 150% better. You know, you have to do 150% better than as our families used to, mothers and fathers used to teach us. You know, like you got to do 150% better than your white counterpart just to make it, just to break even, just to be, to continue to be pertinent in your job, your career. You know, we always had to work harder than our white counterparts. So, and some of the younger folks, I'm not mad at them not understanding, whichever color it may be. They just have not been told the truth. They've been told a lie, so the truth is a lie, as the American history has been told thus far. The truth has been a lie.
So now, what is it though that, you know, we talk about in doing this show, we often like to end on, and I'm not saying we're ending, but we like to give our guests something a takeaway. What is it that they can do? So what role do black and brown people have in addressing race relations in America?
Wow. For me, that begins with changing the racial discourse in America, like in your specific spaces, right? So you got to be more informed about what's going on. And I think we got to create spaces that are gracious enough to have these conversations across these borders of difference, right? Especially race. We can talk about every other demographic identity marker, and there's none as provocative as race. When we talk about race and racism, it's flammable, it's incendiary, right? People get real upset about that. We got to create social tools and technologies that allow us to communicate across this border of difference in ways that bring us in closer community with each other, right? Because to be honest with you, like we are having the same issues that poor white folk got. Like we're in the same economic boat, and they're voting against their self-interest. Like, how do we have conversations with them and say, hey, man, you're in the same boat I am?
Except they got wealth.
Right. What kind? They got privilege. They got no wealth. They got
that is
wealth.
Their wealth.
But you know, Rudy, when you were talking, you know what I thought about? What came to mind for me is that before Colin Kaepernick knelt, people loved him. Do you know what I mean? They were, oh, Colin probably had jerseys and everything with his name on it. And so he was just a great football player. But as soon as he started kneeling, then that's when he became an angry black man.
So
you know what I mean? And so just the whole notion that we're okay as long as we stay in our space and place. Do you know what I mean? And not disrupt things. I don't know why when you were talking, it just made me that came to mind for me.
One of the things that always amazes me is I always hear white folks saying, what can I do? Right. And Dr. Kane was talking about this earlier. Like sometimes they just don't know what they don't know. Right. I think what's missing is like those models. And those models were those white abolitionists that risked their lives to end slavery. There were models out there to show white folk what you need to do, how you can stand in solidarity with equity, equality, and justice. There are models out there. We're not taught about them. I ask the question all the time. Name one white abolitionist.
But let me ask you something, Rudy, on that thing. But you know, sometimes, frankly, and I'm a lover of Frederick Douglass, one of my first heroes. Okay, but this generation, there's a different dynamic, because every Black History Month they tell you about Frederick Douglass, they tell you about King, they tell you about these things, and
Harriet Tubman,
and these kids are tired of hearing these same age-old stories.
Right.
Okay, and frankly, there are heroes. So we've got to change the dynamic to make it current with them. Okay, we've got to talk about what's going on with them to make, because if we don't make it relevant, then like, okay, another history lesson that's forgotten. So we have to find a way, I want, okay, because we could talk about Douglas, we could talk about Du Bois, we could talk about Benjamin Banneker, we could talk about all those guys, but you know what? They never moved that line up to when we talk about James Baldwin. And that's still wild. Okay. And to me, we had no greater social orator at that time than James Baldwin. Okay. I use Facebook as a platform to educate. So my sister was talking earlier and she called me about this thing. And she said to me, she said, well, my brother's been posting up things on Facebook every month, this month on Black folks. And I got a little thing. It's called, Profiles in Black. And I'm making sure that I as much as I love Douglas, one of my first heroes, I actually pretty much, came close to winning an art contest, drawing a picture of him. I ain't putting him up there. Everybody knows that. They're going to move right past the young folks who listen to Jay-Z and everybody. They're moving right past that. So you got to create visuals and you got to create an element of what's going on today, because they're saying, I'm tired of my grandmother's and my mama's history. But you have powerful Black men and Black women who are bringing it in different ways. Ta-Nehisi Coates, you got to make it current for them. That we're talking about today's dilemma, and you got to speak in their voice. And if we don't speak in their voice, we become just another old person. I love my granddaddy, but you know what? I know he's going to tell me the same thing. He's going to sit me on my knee and tell me about slavery and everything else. Okay, and that's good, but we got to mix that lessons and make it current for everybody else. We got to talk about other people.
Well, Mr.
Stacey Abrams. The Black girls going to hear about Stacey Abrams and everybody else who are doing things. The Black entrepreneurs of today and the strides that were made post-slavery. Not to diminish those brothers talk about, because I love them too. But we got to make it current. We can't be dated.
No, and that's when you're just honoring people. I think what we failed at in a generation, I'm gonna name my generation as one that has failed at it. We failed to bring forth the history and the understanding of what was going on prior to our generation, to our kids' generation. And so there wound up being some level of disconnect for a period of time. So now we have to jump forth, like you're saying, to who's relevant to them and in their generation and the kid and their kids as well. Since I'm so old now, now I'm talking about the grandkids. We have to bring forth to them somebody they can relate to, but never forget where why those people are able to do what they are doing is because was done on the backs of those old folks that they get tired of hearing about. Those were the people that allowed Jay-Z to be Jay-Z, Oprah to be Oprah, and so on and so on and so on. So
they made a down payment on our lives.
They made a down payment on our lives to take us to the next level. And we, because we were given maybe in 1970s, I always tell my kids, we were given a pass, well, let's educate these Black folks. Let's give them scholarships. Let's give them BEOG grants and so on and so on. Let's give it to them. And then and then when 1980 hit, okay, we ain't gave them Negroes enough. Now we need to go back. Now we need to rescind what we've been given, and we need to curb what they're doing. So I think you're absolutely correct, but I hesitate in trying to make sure and wanting to make sure that they do not forget the people that brought us to
exactly
where we are right now.
Yes, but I agree with you totally on that. I think it's a continuing education problem.
Yes.
You can't, like Marcus Garvey said, a people without knowledge of the history is like a tree without roots.
Yep.
And to me, no greater statement has been made than that. Okay, but we have to move beyond. Okay, and we have to get current. Okay, with technology, with the internet, with the economy, with the way things move, it's moving at light speed.
Yep.
It's moving at light speed, and their understanding and their grasp of things are much different than ours. We weren't moving at warp speed. We watched Star Trek. Okay, but Captain Kirk, we're out of here now.
We had to go buy what is Encyclopedia Britannica? We had to go and buy those, 1836, 56 books, right, and start trying to flip the pages. These guys press a couple of buttons and they got more than
and the information is right at their hands. And see, that's where we have to go. We can't be dated.
Right.
In our communication with them. We have to sit there and put our egos in check. Because Josh, I think you asked a very good question in this whole thing. You asked the simple facts. What can we do? How can we do it? And we got to educate white folks. Okay, but white folks are constantly asking this question. Well, what can I, after George, what can I do to understand? I understand you guys better. We want to just understand you and deal with you. It's heartaching when I saw George Floyd. Well, it's like, okay, wait a minute. We've been telling you about these things for years, but you didn't listen to it. Fall on deaf ears because, to Rudy's point, it wasn't, socially economic. Okay, it's white privilege. I got mine. I really don't care if you get yours. And you know what? I really can close it. I don't want to hear about this. This is too damaging to make me think that my America is not the beautiful place it's going to be.
Yep.
Your America is a bunch of damn pirates and plunderers all across the damn globe. That's, the people you make historically as heroes are zeros. I'm sorry. You need social orators. We can talk about. And we have to find a way to add, we laugh in this forum too, because there's got to be some humor. One of the best things about humor is that we had Richard Pryor and guys like that, or Dave Chappelle now, who is great, are interjecting humor to get a point across and to make you understand it without it being offensive to you.
Right. They have heroes. They just don't recognize the heroes that they have.
Well, but you know what? But see, we're only talking. But there's a class system we have within our class system. Okay, I got a 31-year-old son. He knows about those people. So it's prudent upon everybody in this forum to teach the nephews, the kids, the aunts and uncles, and do these things. Okay, one of the worst things I ever saw, I had a family reunion many years ago, and my father wanted to talk about the history of the family and the roots, because he had done all this research about it. And his contemporary, my aunt, said, no, we ain't talking. Kids don't want to hear about that. No, they need to hear about it too. To your point, Rogers, they need to hear about it, but they need to hear it in a way and it's palatable to them. You got to make an association. Now, what if you tell these kids that, you know what? I tell you, anybody, Muhammad Ali was the first rapper to me. Who had that cadence? Who had that quick? What's the thing? But if you tell somebody Ali's the first rapper, you're gonna listen more. Okay. Now, if you're gonna tell these other rappers, and see, these rappers are also telling people, we need to listen to Gil Scott-Heron.
Yeah.
Talk about the win in America. Okay. And you break it down, and then you can't force feed them things in the way it was done yesteryear.
Right.
You got to give them, a plate that's palatable to them. And if you don't do it, it falls on deaf ears.
So on that note, I think we should wrap it up this evening. It's been a very, very awesome discussion. I think that if we didn't know, we learned why the truth about what's wrong with the truth about America's history. We really appreciate our guests, Dr. Rudy Jameson and Donald Bell. You all were awesome.
Yep.
I learned a lot from you. I know our listeners did, and we really appreciate it. We don't like to end the show without giving our guests an opportunity to share your final thoughts. So I will start with you, Rudy. What are your final thoughts for tonight?
Yeah, my final thoughts are we cannot address this idea of racial equity and social justice through an ahistorical lens. I think we got to connect the dots. There has to be a through line, right? We are here today because of yesterday, and when we back into that history, like we'll see that through line. And for me, at the end of the day, it's about relationship and relationship in the spirit of love, hope, courage, agency, and community.
Thank you. And the name of you and Rodney Hurst's book again is
Never Forget Who You Are, Conversations About Racism and Identity Development. And it can be found at canonpressgroup.com.
and we'll put that on our website. Thank you. And in the chat.
Thank you.
Thank you. Donald, what are your final thoughts for regarding tonight's discussion?
Well, first of all, I'd like to thank Jocelyn. You invited me on this, and I'm really pleased to have this discussion and learn and get the perspectives from Rudy and Rogers. Gentlemen, I really enjoyed you and hope that we can interact further. And I think that we come from a similar generation, but I think it's good, the learning aspect that we can, in the exchange that we have with each other, are shared thoughts. Okay, we might, extenuate different things and those things, but I think the stake of what Black America is, it happens, we're all having, a commitment to. But I do think that we are in a state where right now it's almost like civil war that's been brought by Trump. Okay, we have a class division that I think that we need to discuss with another generation. What Rogers was talking about, what some don't know, and we're talking about Black folks, I've taught my kids and everything else, but we've got to reach the impoverished, those on the periphery that don't have, those father and those images, and those positive role models like you, Jocelyn, Rudy, and everything. How do we reach them? Because that's the question that I ask for America. That's the question I ask for Black Americans. And that's the question I ask for white Americans, and how we can build structure around having a healthy dialogue and educate the white masses and also the Black masses in a different fashion they've been taught, because what they've been taught so far are lies and hypocrisy.
Thank you. Thank you, Donald. Dr. Kane, we also like to give you an opportunity to share your final thoughts for tonight.
Yeah. Well, I will agree with one of our listeners in which he said that, that our kids recognize the heroes, but not the heroism necessarily. And I think that was very astute on them to make that statement. The other thing I want to just make sure that we get a understanding is that there are heroes. I'm almost going to sound like Donald Trump. There are heroes on both sides, but not to the extent Trump did. And that is, there were good white folks out there, okay, that helped and tried to help get us to where we were free people. And so they were part of the history as it being told correctly. You have the other side of the coin where the history being told incorrectly. They were bad people, white, black, blue, green, yellow. I don't care who it is. If you're a bad person, you're a bad person. And I could care less about you if you don't want to do what's right by your fellow man. And like I said, fellow man or woman. Sometimes these days I got to make sure I be inclusive. But as long as we recognize that the world is not a world that revolves around white males, okay? That this is a world that revolves around many other pleomorphic group of people. And we respond accordingly and give people the equal standing that they deserve. Equal standing for men, equal standing for women, race be damned in terms of inequalities and disparities. You just go ahead, treat people like it should be treated. I know that's a long, long road to hoe, but it's got to be done. And if we don't do it, this country is doomed to fail. At some point, democracy will go awry. Period.
Thank you, Dr. Kane. Thank you, Donald. And thank you. I am. And yeah. Oh, okay. And thank you also, Rudy, as well. And thank you to Rodney Hurst, who wanted to join us this evening and couldn't. You know, I like this show because we really try to, you know, look at what's going on around us today. And this is a topic that is very relevant. It's uncomfortable to some people, but uncomfortable is good because it helps us to grow as people. And so I am happy that we were able to bring this show, this topic to you all tonight. And also always have to thank our behind the scenes technology expert, Tyrone Jackson. Next week, we're going to shift gears a bit and get back to our topic on health. And the reason we focus on health topics is because we want people to know what diseases are impacting people a lot. And that is, it's Colorectal Cancer Awareness Month. So on next Tuesday, March 1st, it begins Colorectal Cancer Awareness Month. And so we want to have the conversation to let folks know what could potentially be happening with themselves and also know how they can have those conversations. We still need to have conversations about our health, have those conversations and encourage our loved ones to make sure they're going to the doctor on a regular basis. So tune in next week for pauseforthetruth.com. And of course, don't forget, if you have not gotten your vaccine to protect yourself from the coronavirus, please go on vaccines.gov and find a location near you and get the vaccine. You can see all of us who've gotten the vaccine, we're doing just fine protecting ourselves from that deadly disease. Dr. Kane, you had a final thought?
Yes, and that was a one point of correction. This was a show about health. This was a show about health. There's mental health that's involved with what we're experiencing these days. So never forget that a healthy individual needs to be a free individual, free to be able to express themselves, not at the harm of others, but this is a show about health.
Absolutely, absolutely. And I may have stated that wrong, but anyway, thank you all. Thank you. Liz, my teacher told me, James W. Lowen, that's another something that we should consider reading, and that's James W. Loewen. Thank you all for listening, and join us next Tuesday for Pause for the Truth. Good evening, everyone.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Good night.